All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. At this point, you should all be able to see my screen. This is my demo account, AdRock Activities. So what we're going to talk about today, once again, is to go over a little bit of how we do billing in Central Reach, talking about claims, talking about invoices, and those types of things. It's going to be a pretty high-level overview just to kind of go through it. Once again, if you do have super specific questions, we can't go into those in too much detail, obviously, because we can't log in and show everybody all the different data from different organizations. But I'll do my best to answer any questions and kind of run through it in a logical manner. If you do have further questions specific about something going on in your account, please don't forget, if you click right here, you can always open a support ticket, send that over to the support team, as well as reach out to the small business community and those emails that you have available to you there. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. So when we talk about billing, we talk about taking the data out of the system, is usually what we're all trying to get at. So how do we get data into the system? So remember that it all starts out on the schedule. You go in, you set up your scheduled appointments, use your service codes, et cetera, pulls in rates, drops it into the system. One of the big things we always talk about before we start our billing process is when we do billing, we want to make sure that all the billing is on the screen. So if I go to $billing, remember that is only my converted timesheets. So one of the big things that we all want to make sure of is that, hey, if I am about to bill for last week, last month, whatever that period is, do I have all potential entries in the system on the billing screen? So kind of as a step one, usually what we talk about here is scheduling module. If I come into view as grid, remember there's lots of different ways to use a lot of the different tools here. And we'll talk real briefly here about this one. When you come here, it defaults the last 7 days. It puts the filter for whoever you're logged in as the principal on account. But if you take that off, what you get is you just get all appointments you're associated with. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a ton of data in here, so let's go back in time a little bit and pull up some information. Ideally, what you see is you see something like this for whatever period is you're about to bill. So usually what we teach people is when you come to this screen, set the period here for the period you're about to bill. I don't need to know about today if I'm not intending to bill today until I need to bill today. So just examine and audit the data that you need to submit. So for example, if I was going to bill this large scale period from about the first of the year through today, I would come in here and I'd want to make sure, is everything that can potentially be billed, is that over on the billing screen? Now, at a glance, we can tell what has been sent to the billing screen and what has not. And the way we can do that is with these little green check marks. So the little green check mark means that something has been converted to a timesheet. Now remember, timesheets and billing entries are synonymous. It's the exact same data. It's all about perspective. A timesheet is always looking at something from the employee perspective. If we put employee pay rates in the system, when we go to the timesheet, we see information about employees and what their pay would be. That same entry also contains the billing information. So our bill rates, our default rates, and all of that information that we need to bill to respective payers. So the billing screen perspective is always the perspective as what is my billed amount? What is my outstanding receivables? And that's how that screen works. Line for line, row for row, exact same data. So when I come here, I am just looking to see what is not on the billing screen for the period I'm about to bill. So if I'm about to bill the month of March or the month of April, for example, or that period that contains that data, anything converted, I'm going to have to make the assumption that it's converted correctly. Now, there's other audits we'll talk about that you can look at and see how to help yourself go through the data, but this is where it all starts. Well, on this screen, additionally, over on the left sidebar, there are filters. And one of the really handy filters here is this conversion audits filter. Now, I do highly recommend to everybody, come in and play with all the different filters. Once you get data in the system, you can see all the cool things that they do. With the limited data I'm going to show you, the filtering I can do is kind of boring. But once again, play with these, start getting the hang of them. I'm just going to show you a few things. So the big thing I want to know here is, since I'm looking at the schedule, I want to know what has not been converted. Remember, anything not converted at the most simple level, I don't know yes or no, was the appointment performed? Can I bill it? That's what I'm trying to get at. If these entries can be billed, well, let's get them converted so that they show up on the billing screen so that I make a claim with them, so that I put them on an invoice and send them out to get paid. If they have not been converted, well, let's cancel them. Let's delete them. Let's get them off the schedule such that they give the time that they contain back to the authorization, and maybe somebody else can use that time. So I want to get these unknowns out of the system. Now, the big other thing I always like to bring up here is the one caveat to the system. Remember, we can only use the system to evaluate appointments inside the system. Meaning, if they're in somebody's paper calendar and they haven't put the information in the schedule in CentralReach, well, obviously the system can't tell you about that. So it's a real big advantage that you have when you use the scheduling functionality to then drive over the timesheet to the billing screen. So please take advantage of these tools. So if I don't know whether or not these were performed, maybe I do know, and I can go ahead and click on view here. Remember, inside the schedule module, I can cancel or delete as needed. If I know that this was performed, if I don't need any paperwork completed, I don't need any signatures, maybe I can go ahead and click on this and then go ahead and create a timesheet. Go ahead and convert it. Let's get it over to the billing system. If I need to follow up, now I know who to follow up with, and I know what times and days to follow up about. So kind of that step one, make sure before you do your billing that you have all the potential billing on the billing screen. Once you've cleaned up this list, ideally what I want to see here is when I say converted no and I pull up a period, I want no results. I want to know that everything in the system has been dealt with, that I know the status of it. Once I have that all set, I'm going to go to the $sign and I'm going to come into the billing screen. Remember, the billing screen here is showing me all converted entries. And so let's say that we just go back into last month. This is all I have for last month. But now, based upon my not converted, I saw, hey, there's other stuff. Maybe I want to go ahead and take care of that stuff. So once again, I'm going to open up this date range and make it a little bit bigger, pull in some more data. Let's see if we go back to March here. There we go. So when I come to this screen here, there are some additional real high-level audits I can do before I go ahead and do my billing. So the high-level audits are over here on the left-hand side. If I click the little filter, it opens up. I click on my filters tab, and what I'm after here are the audits section. Now the same thing I'm going to tell you here. With my limited data, a lot of these audits and a lot of these filters don't do a lot for me, but same thing. If there is a way to find data and you want to filter down to it, there is some way to get there. There's lots and lots of ways to look at the data and to filter the data. I'm just going to go through a handful once again. So when I come into the audits here, I'm going to always do globally, meaning I can look at all entries for whatever period I'm going to do, and I can do duplicates, and I can do overlaps by provider and overlaps by client. And once again, there are a lot of other filters and ways to look at the data, so don't be afraid to play around with this screen. So the first one I'm going to do is duplicates. And so what is a duplicate? A duplicate is something that happens on the same day, same time, same client, same provider, same code. Those are the 5 things that the duplicate filter looks at. If the system finds any duplicates, what it does is it highlights all iterations of the duplicate on the screen. Ideally, when you click on this filter, you get like this. You get no results. This is what I'm looking for. If you have any duplicate results, basically what you want to do is, since you see all iterations, if I have one duplicate, I would see 2 lines. It would be the same line. You want to go ahead and delete one. You want to delete one to take away the billing time. And if you're paying hourly payroll, remember this could be also a duplicate payroll entry. So we want to get those out of the system. The only note I usually remind people of beyond that is if you have attachments, if you're collecting note and form data and attaching that to the timesheets, if you see one of the appointments with the note and one of the appointments without, obviously you probably want to keep the one with the note. Additionally, signatures. If you had client signatures on one, no client signature on the other, same scenario. So you might want to be a little more selective, and perhaps if you saw a duplicate, you would come over here to the gear. Remember, there's a gear on every line, tells you about that line. But if you click here, you can hit preview entry, and this just gives you some stats about it. If there was a signature, it would show the signatures. If there was a note, it would show us a little preview of the note. Tell us the history of the entry. How did this entry make it to the screen? So this is also, once again, how we can do a little bit of research. Duplicates generally come over for one of a couple reasons. One is, remember, the service codes can provide a monitor on this by having only that little box selected that says single timesheet conversion. Sometimes maybe that's not checked. Maybe somebody entered a new code, didn't realize what that did, left it unchecked. By default, we check it when you go to make a new code, but once again, it is a setting. Sometimes people will create an appointment, convert it, and then they cancel the appointment and they go, oh shoot, I didn't need to cancel that. And they recreate the appointment and they convert it again. Well, to this screen, that looks like a duplicate. But over on the schedule, maybe once you canceled out that converted appointment, it no longer shows up. So all you see is the active appointment on your schedule. Remember, on the schedule, there is a way to find cancellations and deletions. So you could look for canceled appointments that were converted. The best thing you can do if you want to try and troubleshoot this, though, is under that little gear. Once again, when you hit that preview entry, look at history, see how the entry got here, see who created it. If you see the word you, that means whoever's logged in currently. Otherwise, you would see somebody's name. So this can provide guidance on the data that you're seeing and how the data got here. But once again, if you do find any duplicates, you want to go ahead and treat those as necessary on this screen, remove them, modify them, ask questions about them to the staff, whatever you need to do. Once we do the duplicate filter, then what we would typically run into is we do the overlapping filter. So the overlap can look at the screen in two different ways, and it's based upon what we hold constant and what we evaluate against. So when we click on overlap by provider, this is going to hold the provider column constant and look for any time and date stamp. So remember, on the screen, we're all tracking things by time and date. And it's going to look for any time that the provider is saying they were in two places at once. So if there is any overlapping time to the minute, we will flag those. Once again, you can deal with those accordingly. A lot of times with providers, unless you're doing group sessions where you know the provider is working with two clients at once, it is a scenario where this is probably a clerical error. A lot of times people might they have an appointment from 12 to 2 and it runs late until 2:30. They go ahead and convert that. And then later that evening, they had an appointment from 2 to 4 as well, for example. And they don't remember that, oh, that's right, I ran late at the first one, so I didn't start that until 2:30. And so sometimes you might see scenarios like that. So a lot of times they're clerical errors, once again, unless you're doing group sessions. Same thing, if you need to change or alter anything, you can come into the gear, click edit timesheet, view the actual line item data, make adjustments as needed. So every line with this higher level billing permission, you can come in and you'll notice even if the entry is locked with those billing permissions to be on the billing screen doing work here, you can go ahead and take that data and move it through the system and adjust it as needed. The next big filter here for a global review is a overlap by client. And so what this does, instead of holding the provider constant, is it holds the client constant, looks for any time that the client is being seen, usually by more than one person, or by more than one person. Could be the same person, could be a clerical error once again, but usually it is a different person. So that a lot of times this occurs when you have supervision appointments and your staff is being supervised doing something, or it could be a scenario where one staff was working in the office, another staff was working with the client face to face. So you could have different scenarios like that. Once again, you'd have to evaluate each one, determine what needs to be done. If your funding source is okay with you billing two people at the same time, then you don't really have to do a lot. So you can use different filters in conjunction with the overlaps. So if you overlap by client, and let's say United Healthcare, military, and veterans, they care if I bill more than one person at the same timestamp. Then you could adjust those as needed. If you have a funding source that doesn't care, that's okay, that says, hey, it's okay to bill 2 people at the same time, we understand how that works, et cetera, then maybe you choose to only review based upon payer, which payers need this type of more in-depth review. So this is the big main global reviews. Once you complete those, usually what we talk about then is moving into individual client reviews, individual payer reviews. The reason we usually talk about that is that once you kind of break down past these big high-level global reviews, you usually want to audit each individual client. If you're using T codes, for example, and a payer needs only 10364T per day, you want to make sure that that's all you have when you submit the claim for that client. So different rules once again. So we reviewed usually by payer because I want you to be thinking about the rules for that specific payer as you move through this, because it makes it easier when you're doing just one payer at a time, because some payers only use half the T code, for example. Some payers use H codes. Rather than seeing this huge mix of data, once again, we want to break it down, make it more digestible so that we can go through it. Now, before I get into all of those individual payer reviews, just want to talk a little bit more about all the ways to filter some of the different options here on this screen. Like I said, if there's a way you want to funnel down and get rid of some data, it's very easy to do. Some of the main things we always show everybody are these horizontal lines next to client, payer, provider. And there's a couple new ones next to service codes and location, for example. What these do is they pull up dynamic lists. And so if I click on the payer list like I did a couple seconds ago, what I get right now is I get a list of all of the payers available on this screen right now based upon the filter I have. So the only filter I have right now is the date range March 1st through April 30th. So the cool thing here is I don't have to know that we work with 50 different payers. All I need to know is what's available to review right now. Same thing with clients, same things with the providers here. They're dynamic lists. When I click on them, they will only give me what's available on the screen right now. So I don't have to know all of the different characteristics of everything in the business. I just need to know what I need to review right now to get my billing going. Additionally, you'll notice that each one of these lists is alphabetized. It's alphabetized by the first character in the wording. So this also makes for very systematized ways to review the data because you can go through in alphabetical order. If you get distracted, I used to keep a piece of paper handy and I'd mark where I left off. Mark somebody's name, just write it down on a piece of paper, mark down what payer it was, etc. So that way, when I came back to work, I know, oh, hey, I just need to pull up the same date range, pull up the filter I was working on, and then just go to the next person in the list or finish the person I was working on. So very nice ways to review. I'm sure you've all played around with these. You also know that when you click on them, it activates it as a filter. So if I click on school contracts as the payer, I get all of the school contract payers. If I remove that filter, once again, my list will return to what I started with. So if I just picked office location, I get just the office location. So once again, if you want to drill down and find something, there's a way to get at it. Also, don't forget anything that's a blue word or blue font color is usually some type of filter, some kind of action can go on with it. So if I click on date, for example, you can do descending or ascending order. So I'm really used to reading the screen from the bottom up. So I'm okay with that. But if you don't like that, if you click ascending order, it'll flip the order on the screen. You'll also notice that it added the little filter that's what the system's doing. Clients, providers, service codes, locations. Once again, lots of ways to look at data. In the hours and units, there's also some cool features here that you can do custom, where you could say, hey, I want to find something equal to or greater than, equal to or less than. So some very similar to kind of like Excel search functions within table data. Very similar type of filtering, but you can do that right here on the screen. Last one I always like to mention too is this really cool load totals. What does load totals do? Based upon the filters you have set, when you click load totals, the system just runs a total of all the columns. When you do this, my data set once again is very small. I have 6 entries, and I can also tell how many entries I have. It'll give me a little summation here at the right on the bottom. The totals here are for 6 entries. It's the total dollars, total units, total hours, etc. If you have more entries, once again, you'll get a different number. But what I like to let people know is when you hit load totals, it load totals for all pages of the data you're looking at. So don't forget here on this screen, when we come here, by default, it is always set to 50 lines per page. Reason is to keep browsers moving very, very quickly. You can look at up to 500 lines of data, but when you do so, obviously the system has to render all those lines. It just slows down the browser screen, so that's why it's not selected by default. If you have more than 50 items, when you hit load totals, it will load totals for all pages based upon the filter once again. So if I hit load totals and I saw 300 here and I was looking at 50 items per page, that means there's 6 more pages of data. Or I could change the page size and load it all on the screen. The only reason I bring that up is sometimes when you're doing things, you might need all items on the screen, or you might want to make sure that you have all items. Let's say you run an export. And you want to make sure your export contains all the line items that you saw on the screen. Well, if I ran an export of this screen, I would expect to see 7 rows of data. Why would I see 7? Because the first row, remember, in the export is going to be the headers. So I'd have that 1 extra row plus 6 rows of actual data. It can be very handy. So as we talked about, each line item once again has that little gear under options, and this is specific to this one line. Everything inside CentralReach is a single line of data. When you make a claim, you make it with these lines. You make an invoice, you make it with these lines as well. When you post payments, you post payments against these lines of data. And that's all by design, because when we do the accounting, especially in a world of claims, we have to do accounting to the line level. A claim is paid, certainly, but if a claim has multiple lines, it's really important which line got paid and how much got paid on said line. So the system does all that work for you. So usually, once again, once we move through those big global audits, and we talked a little about all the different filters here, play around with them once again. It's really fun when you have a lot of data to see what the system can do with that very quickly, very easily. So after we do those global reviews, once again, I usually talk to people when we go into individual payer reviews. So if I'm about to submit, once again, I want to be thinking about what are the rules for any given payer. So let's say I'm going to pull up my United Healthcare. When you're looking at the screen here, same thing. You usually want to filter down to a single client. Well, I only have one. But once again, otherwise your eyes will go crazy trying to look at all the data on the screen. When I filter down to my single client, my single payer, then I'm looking at all of my line items, making sure my codes look good, making sure my POS codes look good. Can we submit with 01 Pharmacy, or is it supposed to be 11 Office or 12 Home? Once again, if I need to alter or fix any of that data before I submit, click on the gear, edit timesheet, fix that data. The big things that we always talk about when people first start billing and you first kind of get the system rolling is making sure that formulas are all working how they should. Remember, hours to units is programmed at the code level. If I don't see 12 units for 3 hours because this is a 15-minute unit, that's a problem. I want to go in the system, fix the service code so that I start getting the correct information over here. If I have T codes that are 30 minutes, I should expect to see 6 units instead of 12. So make sure your setups are all correct. Next thing is always double check your rates. Make sure that your build rate and your greed rates are set up correctly. The big reason we always go through this and talk about this so much is that when you first get rolling, remember, once you save an entry, this is all historical data, and it's all historical by design, because when we do accounting on it, we need to do the accounting as of the time that this existed. If my rates changed on 4/1 and they went up to $15 per unit, for example, well, everything prior to 4/1 needs to contain $12.50 a unit, because that's what it was. That's the accounting of that time frame. So these are all historical. If you see any errors here, you can absolutely fix them, but you have to navigate into each timesheet and fix it. So please scrutinize these very heavily when you first get started. Usually once everybody gets rolling, given that everything's doing what it's supposed to do, the formulas don't change. And so it all works very cohesively and it works very well. The math here on the total charges. So this $150 in the billed charges column, I can tell that this is being created with a mathematical formula based upon units times my rate. And the way I can tell it is by the picture of the little flask there, little chemistry flask. If you ever see a picture of a little clock, that means your charges are being based upon time. The way the math works in Central Reach when it's units is it takes the rate, this would be your rate per unit, that's how you would program it, multiplies it by the number of units, and that's how we come up with total billed charges. Same for agreed. If you have the little picture of the clock face, what you would do is that means that time is prorating your total billed charges. So we prorate to the minute. So it would take the time in hours to the minute, multiply it by your rate, in which case you would want to make sure your rate was programmed in your per hour rate, because remember, we're going to prorate all the hours, and then it's going to do the math, hours, minutes times rate per hour equals our total billed charges. Same thing here. Double check them really heavily, but once you get everything running, given that it's all doing what it needs to do and it's working correctly, it's very easy to move forward and make your claims and invoices. So once we review the data, we come through. If I had more clients, I would do the rest of my clients, making any necessary changes before I do my billing. And then I would remove my filters, go back to my first list, and then I'd move on to the next payer, whoever that was. I'm going to do that until I'm all done. You could optionally just review one payer at a time and then generate claims for that one payer at that time when you're all done. So there's two different ways to do this. Same thing when you go to create claims or create invoices. You can do big batches with multiple payers and multiple clients, or you can do one payer at a time or one client at a time, however you want to handle it. Same thing when we talk about starting out is usually we would tell people you're going to go ahead and you want to bill one payer at a time, excuse me. The reason we do one payer is if I've reviewed all of this data, well, I know I'm ready to go ahead and submit it. The system can very easily do large batches, and so make it easy on yourself. But the reason we say pair at a time, once again, is due to what do I need in the different fields on my claim. I want to make sure that the data I'm getting on those fields is based upon those payers' rules. Maybe you have a payer that you submit your organizational information in all of the appropriate boxes. Maybe you have another one that the signature box, box 31, needs to be the actual person that's registered and in network with the payer, and the other information needs to be your billing information or your organizational information, and that's all the same. So you can be thinking about those different rules, and usually that falls within each individual payer, so it makes sense to generate claims that way. So once we review the data, we will go ahead and get ready to send it out. Some other cool tips are you can filter this screen further. So for example, I have this code here that has no time, $0. So maybe when I go to submit these, I want to filter this out. Well, I could filter it out by saying, hey, only show me the information here that has outstanding amounts in this owed column. And that gets rid of that $0 billing. You can use service code labels. They can be really handy. For example, if you have a mix of non-billable codes and billable codes at any given time, when you go to do your billing, what you really care about is putting your billing onto an invoice or a claim. So you could create service code labels and use those to pull up just billable time so that you get rid of, what I call the noise of non-billable. We need it all in there. We need it in there sometimes to run payroll and do different things and keep track of data and times and what people did. But when we go to billing, I just want my billing information. So just show me that. So once again, you get the system to do a lot of that work for you, that heavy lifting. Once you get all those entries on the screen, typically you will go ahead and select all. If you said, hey, I only want to bill the 28th, if you just select that one, all we take with us to the next step is what you check. So we go ahead and select those. And then up here at the actions button, if we're going to make a claim, we click bulk merge claims. If we want to make an invoice, we click bulk generate invoice. So remember, embedded in the timesheet itself is all of the information to do either thing with it. There's a whole lot of data that comes over with a timesheet, as we know. Based upon where you want to take the data in a billing sense, we pick and choose which fields we bring over. So if I'm just making an invoice, what's important? Well, client, date, time, provider codes, rates, POS code, but that information that you need specifically for a claim, like the signatures, who's the billing, where was the facility, the rendering provider, the referring provider, that data, once again, can be embedded in the timesheet. But when I make an invoice, I don't need it, so we leave it behind. Same thing when we make a claim. When we make a claim, we pull over that more claim-specific information into the claim. So actions, bulk merge claims. And what we do here is we come to kind of this intermediary step. So this is where we can do some initial scrubbing of our data, looking at a few of the main fields that go into claims. Usually when we come to this screen, we go ahead and tell everybody, go ahead and click Collapse All to expand out. That way you can see all the information on these timesheets. The timesheets themselves, these are all of the individual lines from the previous screen. Right now, the way it's set up, when you first come to this screen, we would make a claim with each individual line exactly as it comes over. That's what separated claims view is. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a couple minutes. But once the data comes to this screen, we can review some of it. So we can see the codes, the dates, the diagnosis codes. If there was an authorization, we would see the authorization number up here. It would also be a hyperlink that would take us to the authorization if we want. Diagnosis codes. If we needed to add one, we could click the plus button and add one. If this one wasn't correct, we could click the X and get rid of it. Similarly here, as we make claims or as you make an invoice, claims more specifically, you will find any hole in the database. Patient account numbers, patient subscriber IDs, patient addresses, subscriber. You'll find all these little holes in the database. So usually what I tell people is, as you find these holes, so if there was no diagnosis code here, for example, and I went, oh shoot, why isn't that coming over? There is a way to program it so it comes over by default every time. There's a way to program it to the authorization so it comes over with the authorization information as people convert. If you don't see it here and you know you want it, go in and backfill that data. Usually within a couple batches, if you pay attention to this stuff and you backfill the data as you go, you can fill all these holes so that when you come to these screens, they move faster and faster and faster. The audit of the time back on the billing screen should take a while because you got to go through it all. When you actually go to make a claim or make an invoice, that process should be relatively quick by comparison. If not, once again, use the different tools here to go, oh, why is this set up this way? Let's go get that fixed. Use our help section, use support tickets, use your supports here with the small business team. You got lots of resources. The other thing to bear in mind here when you come to the screen is anything you change on this screen only changes moving forward to the claim. It doesn't go back and change anything on the schedule, on the timesheet, nowhere else in the system. That's all by design too, because there are certain fields sometimes you want to override with information that doesn't necessarily pertain to the schedule, but does pertain specifically to submitting a claim. And so you know, make sure you set up that information that way accordingly. Diagnosis code, and then it moves into individual service lines. The portion that goes on the claim is the portion to the left of the colon. So when you set up your codes, this is the line that says code. When the next line is description, that's the portion to the right of the colon. That's typically just that internal description. So when people pull this up, they know what it means. So we don't send that anywhere. Pointers. So this is the pointer that points to the diagnosis code. Double check that you have them. If you don't have a diagnosis code set up, you will not have a pointer because the pointer has nothing to point at. This comes over the pointer at the time of conversion. So you have to have a diagnosis code when you convert to get a pointer. If you don't, you won't get a pointer. This field is very easily editable here. As you notice, you can type in the box 1 and you can add it here. It's much quicker to do here than it is to do after we make the claim, and that's just has to do with the way that the system scrubs the data and how you interact with it on the different screens. So if you see it missing, grab it. Modifiers. If you need modifiers, go ahead and double check and or add them here. Remember, modifiers are programmed as well. If you have a modifier you consistently need, you can program that and attach it to the service code so that it comes in automatically, so you don't have to constantly add it. This next column, the provider column, this does two different things in Central Reach. So by default, when we come to this screen, the provider here listed is always the actual person that performed the appointment. We want the schedule with them, we want the timesheet with them, we want the payroll with them. When we talk about taking this data over to a claim, this provides the information for box 24J. That's your line item MPI number. So you want to make sure that based upon who you're submitting to and what they are expecting in 24J, set this up accordingly. That's why this column is editable. If you click on the little looking glass or magnifying glass here, you notice that you get a little box here and you can type in somebody's name. Now, when you go to type in somebody's name, this person has to have claim settings set up inside the system in order to be visible here. Why? We know you're about to make a claim. If you don't have claim settings set up with a contact, remember, we won't map anything into the box that corresponds to this information on the claim. So we won't let you pull in anybody that doesn't have claim settings. So a little troubleshooting tip here is if you type in somebody's name, you know that they're in Central Reach. So step one is, are they in Central Reach for you to pull? And then number two is if you know that they're in, but their name's not coming up here, navigate over to their contact in the contacts module, go into settings, claim settings, and make sure they have settings there. So if I change that, now in 24J, I will get that person's information. The payer column, as long as all of these are the same, you will not have any errors here. If one of these is different or one of them is missing, you would get a little error here and you'd have to fix that. Location, box 32, billing, box 33. You'll notice because I have a different piece of information on this timesheet versus these, I'm getting a little error here. Based upon which one I want to keep, if I want to keep one of these, there's this cool synchronize function. When you click the sync button next to the entry you want to keep, we make them all the same. You notice that cleared the error because they're unified. There's only one box 33, we only have one piece of information there. Referring box 17, not super commonly used, but if you need it, that's how you can get that information on the claim, or you can edit it once again after you make the claim. Provider supplier, that's that signature box. Once you have these all set for this group of data, you would then move on through the screen if you have any more. Couple notes about this. If you are doing more than 20 clients at a time, you might get a little next page notice up here saying you're working on one of 20 of 25 clients, and then there'll be a next page. After you finish this page, you can make all the claims and then go to page 2, finish up. Don't forget to finish them all. After you review the data, also what we typically recommend is, as a rule of thumb, come up here and click on Combined Claims View. So Combined Claims View looks at the dates and the codes. If it sees the same date and the same code, you typically want to merge those together where you add the units together, add the dollars together, and submit those as one single line on a claim. Most insurance computers are programmed that if they see more than one line item, it's the same date and same code, they kick out anything after the first one is a duplicate. So that's how we prevent that. As a rule of thumb, we usually tell everybody just go ahead and click this right before you generate the claims. Why? Because it does that combined function. Additionally, if there's nothing to combine, as you can see, the system does nothing with the line items. Finally, it also provides a very cool check and balance on your T codes if you're using those. If you have a 0364T, for example, and you know that this payer only needs one per day, if you ever saw a 0364T combine, you go, hey, hold on, let me back up, let me fix that. The way you would know if any lines combined is there'll be a very large blue plus button just next to the code over here in the date. So that's how you could know that that's going on. Last couple things up top, include times. This is if you wanted the timesheet times brought into the claim. Split on service location, not typically used. This would take the service location, the actual physical address you program at the schedule level or at the timesheet level, and would split the claims based on that and force this information into box 32. Sometimes used or was used historically for TRICARE geo pricing, when they had different zip codes based upon reimbursement, they had those used to base differential reimbursement on. And then this last one, split on providers. What this one does, it's very cool, is if you have multidisciplinary practice and you just split claims up based upon the actual people that perform the appointments, it provides a split based upon the provider column here. And so it's just one way that we help speed up the claims generation process. Once you're all set, you can go ahead and generate the claims. So generate this claim just does the items above it. Start claims generation would start at the top of the page and come all the way down through and finish the whole page. The only note I like to throw out here for people is if you're making a whole bunch of claims, they have a whole bunch of lines, don't be alarmed if this takes a couple minutes. Click the button once, wait for it, it'll run through and do it. Once the claims are made, then the claims move over into the claims manager. And this is where we can print them. If you have electronic set up, you can submit them electronically. If you have any errors, the system will show you that you have some errors. Once it comes over here, we're actually looking at all of the different fields, making sure they're filled out. Doesn't mean all of the right information is in the boxes, but we do double check to make sure that the boxes are filled out. Errors are no errors. You can go look at all the data. You can make any modifications you want. Under Actions, you would click Edit, and that opens up the claim in the Claims Editor. And you can go through the different fields and modify as needed. To take the data out of the system. So now I go, hey, I want to print a claim, or I'm going to submit electronically. You can select multiple entries or just one. Same idea here. Whatever you check comes with you to the next step. And if I click Actions here, Export Download, 1500 form is my default. There are a couple different other options. So if I go ahead and click Export here, I can go ahead and export the file and it will run down here. And then I click Download to pull it up. If I had multiple claims, don't forget you'll get them all in one big download. If you have a single claim, you'll get this. Also bear in mind, if you have more than 6 line items of data, because a claim form paper can only have 6 lines, you'll get multiple pages. Just make sure you print them all. Generally, you don't need to print the backs. You can just print the fronts. We do provide this full background image. So if you have a color printer, you can just spit them out. If you need to print them on pre-printed 1500 forms, you will have to download this, take it into Adobe Reader. We do have a help article about that, and you can get just the text onto those forms. Electronic claims can contain up to 50 lines of data, and it's all one claim. Electronic process, same thing here. This file to us is both electronic and paper. You would select the item or items, click Send to Gateway. If you had a gateway set up, you can then be prompted to send those out. So that's the nuts and bolts of the claims process. We'll go through invoices real quick as well. If you do have any questions coming up, go ahead and pop them into the questions bar. So back on the billing screen, once again, all of the data here is whatever you want to do with it. It is an invoice or it's a claim, or it can be both. So for example, sometimes when you send out claims, you're going to get back information. The insurance company's going to pay you part, and you're going to have copays. And you're going to set up copay information here. So the way you would populate the copay, remember in Central Reach currently, copay just means patient responsibilities. Copay, coinsurance, deductible, it's just a cell to track what that patient responsibility is. The way to get information into it is if you click on it here on the screen, you can go ahead and edit it in line, click the save button. If you posting payments manually, as you post the payments, after you do that, you could come in and update these line items so that you can put the copay in and then generate those invoices. If you are using electronic and the ERA functionality, there are ways that the system can help you get the information in the box. So different functionalities there. Based upon what type of invoice you want to make, what type of data you want to put on it, you would select, once again, typically a date range. Sometimes it might be specific to payer. Sometimes you might want to tell the system, hey, I only want to make copay invoices with outstanding copays, some portion of the copay that is still owed to me. And this is a very cool filter here that then looks at the line items, and then, as you can see, it only filters to those line items where some portion of this copay is still owed. Doesn't mean it's all owed. Doesn't mean that you can't continue collecting, but it just means that some portion of it's owed. Based upon what you want to take to the invoice, same scenario here. Select one line, select multiple lines, select all, actions, bulk generate invoices. When you click this button, if you have more than 50 lines, the system will prompt you, do you want to pull all the lines or just the 50 you have on the screen? And you can choose what you want to do there. Most of the time you want to pull them all. I forgot to mention that when you go to make claims, it'll do the same thing. If you select all, but you have more than 50, it'll ask, do you want to make it with all of them? So I'm going to click bulk generate invoices, and then we come in, and most people have the 4 invoice types up top. This is a specialized one for Nevada. The way that the 4 main invoices work is there's a client invoice. The way it works is it pulls the total owed amount, the far right column from the billing screen, puts that on invoices, please pay us this. Typically used for like your self-pay, private pay, if you work with school districts and you bill them full amounts, or any scenario where you're going to bill that full amount to someone. Sorts the invoices 1 invoice per client. Provider invoice works just like the client invoice, except it sorts the data 1 provider at a time. Not super commonly used. We see this used sometimes with 1099 employees that you want to keep track of what they're doing. Copay invoice. This is like the client invoice in that it sorts the data 1 invoice per client. The difference is on this one is we only pull the amount from the copay column. So that amount entered in those boxes underneath the copay column. If a line item has no copay in there, it's just going to say 0 on this invoice. Doesn't mean there's not an outstanding amount. It's just that on this invoice type, that's all we pull. And that's pretty powerful too, because if you had a scenario, for example, where you wanted to bill the insurance and you wanted to bill the copay at this, at the same time or after that, as long as you populate the copay box, you could make that invoice with just that copay amount. Activity statement is all the data about the appointments minus the dollar amounts initially. If you want to add the dollar amounts, you could. This is typically used for like service audits, or if you have a client that says, hey, once a month, could you send me over all the notes that we have? You could do this and it doesn't contain any of that billing information, any of the dollar amounts. So I'm going to go ahead and select copay invoice. And what I get here is I get 2 different invoices, 1 per client. Bill to. The bill to information is going to go to this location for the payer. Go to the subscriber tab. Remember, there's multiple tabs in there. Pull the subscriber address. If instead you really wanted to send this to the funding source, if you check this box, we will pull the address from the funding source from the database and drop that as the send to address. Bill from, this would be, what do you want the return address to be on your invoice? Once you go ahead and select that, given that you want the same thing for all of them, you can click use same for all. It'll just go down this column and copy it. So if you had 10 clients, 20 clients, 50 clients, it'll just copy it down. If you wanted different addresses for all of them, you could do that too. Due date, similar thing here. Defaults to 2 weeks from today. If you want to change it, click in the box and change it to what you want. This is user specified. If you change it and you want to copy this first cell all the way down the page, same thing, you click use same for all. If you want to make them all different, you can. Once you have those 3 components set up across the screen there, then you get the big red bulk generate copay invoices. Go ahead and click that, and then the invoices get made. This will take you to a print preview. This screen will come up if you have 20 or less. If you have more than 20, they are all stored underneath $ invoices. They are always there. They are always available. What this is in essence doing is taking those entries and dropping them to a virtual piece of paper. The reason I say virtual is it isn't a real piece of paper until you print it out, until you take it out of the system, email it. If you're allowing patients to log in, you do have to make the invoice visible to them. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And so this preview screen is just a preview of approximately the first page of data. If all the data fits on the first page, you'll see it all. But don't be alarmed if you're expecting this invoice to be $3,000 and 50 lines of data. It probably doesn't fit on the first page. This first page is all about getting this layout. So I can select what I do or don't want based upon the little check boxes in all the different places. Everybody usually plays around with the columns the most. Once again, you can usually create anything you want. You can make them as complicated or as simple as you want. You can add in payments information. Under the other section, there's a few other choices. This will change the header here where it says copay invoice. Some people like to change this to patient responsibility. And so you can go ahead and do that. Different toggles, different groupings, different sortings. Last couple things here. Notes is a one-off note field here on this invoice, and global note is a note you want on every invoice based upon your user login. Once you get those set up and get all these check boxes the way you want, there is an option here to update your global defaults so that every time you go to make a copay invoice, that selection based upon your login, you'll get the same layout here. Lastly, you would generate the PDF. Once you do this, that's when the system actually makes them. You can download them all at once or download individual ones. And then the last thing here is over on the invoice screen, just to show you. Once you generate the PDF, you then have the option to make it visible to the client when they log in. It's just a toggle on and off. If you do select multiple entries, you notice you can change them on and off at the same time. Client payable, that would mean that if you have a merchant account set up through CentralReach and you're processing credit cards, you could make it payable to the client. Currently, they can only pay in full. They cannot make partial payments. You could do partial payments if they contacted you and you do it as an employee. If you want to reprint an invoice, you could reprint it, you could void, or you could download them again. Invoicing as a whole is, it's a much simpler thing, just putting data on a piece of paper. If you do want to reprint them, you can. If you want to make invoices again, it just makes invoices with the billing entries again. It does not create more billing. So people get a little bit confused by that sometimes. All in all, I hope you learned a lot here. I hope everybody learned something new today. Thanks very much for your time. And if you do have any questions, you know how to get a hold of us. Thanks again and take care.